Okay, hello everyone, welcome back. Dave James here, and I've got a short presentation for you about annotating maps and what that means and why it'll be useful for yourselves as games designers going forward. Okay, so just to have a quick recap, if we cast our mind back to the assignment, I've highlighted two important parts that show up in both milestone 1 and milestone 2. And what we've got is 50% annotated maps, including multiple layers and annotations, and that shows up in both assignment milestone 1 and milestone 2. Okay, so these annotated maps, clearly they carry a significant weight of 50% for both assignment 1 and 2, and you'll be using these for almost different things, I suppose. So for assignment 1, you're going to be using your maps to provide information that you've identified as being important to the level analysis of an existing game. So you're pulling out important aspects of a level that you've analysed. For assignment 2, what you're going to be doing is communicating key information about your Unreal Tournament design. So a brand new level that you've made up, and you need to share with us all the aspects of the design, and you'll do that using these annotated maps partly. So basically you're using these maps to both analyse an existing and also presenting a new design. Okay, so when we come to annotate a map, there's a balance we have to strike between too much and too little information, because the whole point of a map and the whole point of an annotated map, and I'll go more into it in a couple of slides of what annotation means, but the whole point of it is to convey information and communicate it to the reader as clearly as possible. So it needs to be readable, but it also needs to be informative, and striking the balance between the two can be, is a skill in itself. If you don't give enough information, the reader won't understand what everything does within the map. In this particular simple example, we've got this layout and these colours, but we don't really know what any of the colours mean. We could guess, but we may be wrong. However, if we have a more complex set of annotations, so we have more text on the level, more detail, well, this is okay in the sense that we can now see what those things are, but there's almost too much. It's too cluttered. And if this level had even more in it, even more items or elements such as enemies and objectives and what have you, it risks being really messy and too confusing to really understand. So one of the ways we can sort of help to make this easier with our annotations and a bit more readable is to use a simple thing called a legend. And you'll be used to these from games that you've played, I imagine. Many games, particularly those with open worlds, use these. What legends allow us to do is to kind of group simple, repeated map elements and make it easier to actually see what is going on, because it takes all the annotation away from the actual layout and places it in the corner or out of the way, and we can reference what these things do and what they are representing, and that's really fine. That will work. We could actually even take this one step further though, and making it a bit more simple and readable. If we've got elements which aren't repeated, such as in this case the start and the goal only appear once, and whilst this is fine, it's almost more efficient to take them out of the legend because they only appear once, so you might as well write them just once where they are anyway. So now we've written within the map using in-map annotations. We have the start, we have the goal, and the legend is now reserved purely for things which repeat throughout the scene. Okay, so it just, again, makes it neater, makes it more readable, and that's not a bad place to arrive at for a simple map. Here we're just going to have a quick look at some existing maps from existing games. So from Gears of War we have this multiplayer map. Here we're pointing out a few interesting things that lend to the design, such as the start points of both the red and the blue teams. We've got the first cover points where the teams will first get into cover before they advance. And we've also interestingly pointed out the mirror line, the centre point, and we can see that both teams will inch their way forward through the cover towards this mirror line. So we would have several versions of this map pointing out other things. So in the next map, here we've decided, to point out the spawn points, the cover, and the point of symmetry. But we've also got another version of the map pointing out the items. And again, that's absolutely fine to have multiple versions of the same map pointing out different information. In fact, we expect it. So here we can see at a glance using the legend where various things are, such as the pistol, the bow, the boom shot, and the frag grenades. We specifically say within assignment 1 and 2 that we want multiple maps, and that's plural. So, not just one, we want multiple. And again, this means you can provide multiple versions of the same map, the same layout, but each version of it providing different sets of information to us. You don't need to cram everything into one level because that could risk making it unreadable. So we could have one map that just shows off doors and items, such as we've got here. Absolutely fine. Then we could have another map, for example, and these are all examples and depend upon the game that you choose. We could have an objective map. Most games have objectives of some sort, be they single or multiplayer games. And these games tend to, these objectives, they're either sequential or non-sequential. And by sequential, we mean the player has to do them in order. Non-sequential objectives means you can do them in whatever order you like. But even those games, open world games that tend to have non-sequential objectives, they still have a start and an end point. And we'd still probably want to see that factored into the map, just because it helps us to see, which point the game begins and ends in essence. What you want to do is ensure that all your objectives are numbered. So in this particular example on the right, we've got get the data disk, hack the PC, kill the guard and escape. And that helps us to see the order in which the players should attempt them. And also, again, just a short bit of information. I haven't written out the whole objective brief because I don't really need to know the full set of exactly all the lore or all the small information, but as long as I've got a general idea of what the player needs to do in each area, it gives me a feel for that map. Enemies is an interesting one, and this will very much depend from game to game, dependent on how the enemies behave in that particular game. So for an enemy map, you may decide to point things out, such as the type of enemy. Depending on the game, you could also have the patrol routes. The direction that the enemy's facing may be relevant. In some games it is, and some it isn't. And things like line of sight and field of vision. Now the latter tends to fall more into stealth games, perhaps such as Metal Gear Solid or the Hitman games, but fine to bear in mind, but those aren't games which are in our particular pool of games that you need to pick for the assignment. In this particular example on the right hand side, I've represented the enemy using like a house shape with an arrow, and that arrow is representing the way that the enemy is facing. Again, it doesn't really matter if that's not relevant to the particular game that you're picking, and it might not matter at all. You could also use the same icon but with different colours. So if I wanted to show multiple enemies, I could have the red representing perhaps a soldier, then a yellow colour of this particular icon representing maybe a drone, a dog, whatever, so you could use the same icon shape but with different colours and represent it all within your legend, the different enemies, and that would work fine. If we're talking about things like patrol routes, then you could put end icons, so have the enemies start and have an end icon, or draw with a line where the enemy will patrol to and back using arrows. Absolutely fine. Again, as long as it is clear and not overly confusing in the actual map, then it serves its purpose and conveys the point, and it's great. There's loads of different sorts of maps you may want to create. For example, item maps are very useful to see what a player might find when they move around a level. It's particularly useful in multiplayer levels because items are one of the things that we use to move a player around the level and encourage movement, as we've talked about in previous videos. So item maps for your UT levels are particularly useful. Again, as much information as possible about these items. So if the game has small and large health packs, for example, point out whether they are small or large, because that will have a bearing on the actual gameplay or the end result of the game itself or the challenge. Also, it'd be good to see if you wanted to. You don't have to use simple shapes. If you wanted to use small icons, like you find in some games, such as pixel art ammo icons or coins, then by all means do use that if you want to create them. That's absolutely fine. Just be wary of taking other people's work. We don't want you sort of taking copies of other things and using their icons unless you're going to reference them. Ideally, if you want to draw something, just draw something simple and put it in. Simple icons are most normally the best thing to use. Really useful would be an elevation map, and we'll talk more about this perhaps when we move into Photoshop and look at a few more things with that. But elevation, it's really good to see the different heights and what sits above what within the map. So you could represent that using different colours or gradients, as I've done here. We've got a gradient moving from blue to white to show an increase in height, and here we've got kind of a dotted effect. That could represent, something that's higher up. Again, as long as it's detailed within a legend, we don't have to figure out what's going on, and that'd be really cool, really useful. Other things we're going to look at in the future then, going forward, and we don't need to worry about right at this second, but do bear it in mind that it's something you will want to do further down the line, are critical paths, so the key routes through a level. The collision points, so where players encounter each other, and heat maps, so that these designate areas of interest, perhaps where people conflict or where people die or what have you. And we'll talk more about that all in a later session. One thing to bear in mind when we move into Photoshop this week is, yes, we've asked for multiple maps, but that doesn't mean that you have to have loads of loose random files scattered around your hard drive showing different things. You can actually keep them all in the same Photoshop file if you smartly use your layers. So what I've done here is use the folder tool within the layers panel to create subfolders. So I have a folder for items, a folder for objectives, and a folder for enemies. And then outside of the folders, so what I use for every single map is a background. The general layout of the level I use for every single map. And I've also kept doors to be used for every single map. So these sit outside of my subfolders. And then within these subfolders, I've got perhaps a layer that shows off the different enemies, a layer which shows off different objectives, and perhaps multiple layers that show off health, ammo, all sitting within the item folder. And then all I need to do is click this eye icon to make them invisible within my Photoshop project. So I can turn on and off different layers depending on what I want to see, and then export out these as PNGs, or I could even use the snipping tool to just take a quick screen grab of whatever I'm looking at that moment. And that means I've got everything in one nice file and it's nice and neat. So again, we'll explore this more in class, but useful to bear in mind. So finally, that's map annotation in a nutshell. Annotations essentially mean adding extra information to the layout of your map to convey information. And they're a powerful way of conveying this information, and tells us all about your analysis and your design. So for assignment 1, it shows that you've identified the key things that make up that particular level. For assignment 2, it shows that you've fully considered your design and included within your design all these different important aspects of the game. Just again, to reiterate, as per the brief, we want to see multiple maps. Where people have fallen down in the past in previous years is they've just done one. We want to see a bunch showing off as many and as much information as possible. Finally, the pixel map tutorials that Mike's got are a great way, like we've used in this video, of just showing simple map layouts, and they're a good starting point from which you can build more complex maps further down the line. That's everything from me for now, and I'll see you folks in class. Thank you.